All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. And hello. Today I wanted to share with you all how we can create secrets and access them within Snowflake Notebooks. A lot of you might have heard of these new features coming from Snowflake called Snowflake Notebooks, um, and it's really a game changer because you can basically create Python notebooks. Um, and use them within Snowflake. So, for example, you can have a cell-based programming environment, and you can actually leverage Python, you can leverage SQL, you can leverage Markdown, and create those notebooks just like you used to create Python notebooks or R notebooks, and run them natively in Snowflake. Now, why this is the game changer is because you have your data on Snowflake. Most of you who work in tech either work with a data warehouse, maybe GCP, maybe AWS, or sometimes you might be even using Snowflake. And having Snowflake notebooks allows you to actually build an analysis or do some, I guess, leverage machine learning algorithms, or even now leverage Snowflake Cortex, which is their AI offering, and do a Cortex search, which essentially is a vector search. And a big piece of this is that you want to be able to do all of this in Snowflake notebooks. And so you might want to reach out to an OpenAI key, for example. And so for that reason, you want to store your OpenAI API keys in your environment and not have them in your code, right? So today I'm going to show you how you can leverage Snowflake secrets and access them straight away in your Snowflake notebooks, and hit that OpenAI API endpoint to get the OpenAI weights and models, and then run them on Snowflake. So let's get started. A couple of things that we'll do today is that first we will create a database and a schema. In my case, I already have a database and schema, but you can use one of the documentation that I'll show you to create a database and schema. Then we'll go over how to create privileges for um, creating a secret. And then, of course, we'll have to create a network rule, and we'll have to create an external access integration. And of course, we'll have to create a notebook. And finally, we will create these things after granting the access, and then we will run a notebook and access that secret that we created earlier. So let's get started. So the first thing, like I told you, you'll have to create a database and schema. In my case, I already have a Snowflake learning role and a database. Sorry, I'll quickly show you here. I already have a database, Snowflake Learning DB, and I have a schema called dev schema that I'll be using right now in this video. So you don't need to create a new database and schema if you already have one. We only need to make sure that this database and schema has the correct grants that we'll do in the second step. So another thing I'd like to tell you that if you are new to Snowflake, Snowflake has this concept of context, basically, and it's a well-known concept where they say that you should have the right context when you're running any of the statements so that you can run them successfully and not have an access denied or object not found issues. So a context basically consists of a database, a schema, and table. So this will be your storage. So a context is a storage, which basically means you have to provide a database where your data table will live, or your Snowflake object will live. And storage will be defined by database, schema, and table. So in this case, Snowflake Learning DB will be my database, dev schema will be my schema, and any tables or any functions or any procedures or any Snowflake objects for that matter will go within that. Another thing that we need to know is virtual warehouse. In Snowflake, a virtual warehouse is basically a compute that is a cluster of computes or virtual machines that is running on top of the Snowflake warehouse. So it's like a bunch of computers that you have available at your disposal to run these queries on. And so that's a virtual warehouse. And the third thing is the role. And these three things basically define a context. So you need to have a virtual warehouse, you need to have a role that allows you to run these queries, and then you have to have a storage. In my case, I already have a Snowflake learning role, which I defined earlier for this particular demo. And I recommend you to create another role if you don't have one besides account admin, because account admin basically has all the privileges and you want to obey the privilege, the access, what we call um, the principle of least privilege, so that you don't access or delete something while running through this demo accidentally. So you want to have a role which does not have too many access at this time, so you don't really um, mess with other parts of the database as you're doing any of the queries here. So so if you want to create a new database, I'll recommend you to go into Snowflake, create database, and you can have this command. You can basically use this to create a new database. It says create database name. I would rather say you create a database without any snapshots. A simple command will be the create database, just name, if not exists, name, and then that's it. Usually you have a database already. Then of course you'll have to create a schema as well. So to create a schema, you can basically go to, let's say, create schema, dev schema. All you have to do is create schema, dev schema, and you'll have the schema within your Snowflake database. Now, when you have the context, you basically need to set that context over here, or you'll have to use a fully qualified domain name, which basically means that you'll have to do select star from database.schema.table. So if you don't want to do that, you can just set the database that you're working on and then the schema that you will be working with right here. And also you'll have to define a role that you'll select over here, and then you'll have to have a Snowflake learning warehouse. So without much further ado, let's get on to the granting the privileges. So let's say you already have a database and schema, and now you want to be able to create a secret, which will hold your API key. So the command for creating a secret is right here. So all it needs is create or replace secret, and then it needs, if not exist, you can add that, but without replace. And then you provide a name, then you provide the type of the secret, that's OAuth 2 in this case, and API authentication if you have a security integration, of course, which we'll talk about later, and OAuth scopes, and a comment about what it is. Now, this is for an OAuth kind of integration where you want to be able to create a secret, for example, for an HTTP request that uses OAuth tokens to um, authenticate and then get you some data from or API from somewhere, right? In our case, we just need to create a simple secret that we want to access within the Snowflake notebook. So we don't need an OAuth in this case. There are other kinds of secrets as well. You can have a cloud provider API token as well, how to authenticate to a particular cloud. You can have a basic authentication, which means you can have a username password kind of authentication as well. So you can use this for that. And then you can have a generic string. For our example, we just need a generic string. So I'll copy this one. And now I'll edit this to remove some of the bits that we don't need. So let's say we want to create a secret called OpenAI key. OpenAI API key, right? Actually, let me make it API key. And then I say it should be a generic string. And the secret string would be, let's say, in this case, because I'm not actually creating an API key, which you would have generated early on OpenAI. So you'll fill that in here. I'll just keep it as ABC, or I'll just name it my secret OpenAI key, API key, API key. Yeah. And then I'll remove the comment for now because I don't need it. Now, before I run this command, because I do not have a privilege to actually create a secret right now, it will fail. So what we'll have to do first is to grant secret creation privileges. So what we'll do is, now that you are within this database and this schema, and then you have this role, you will go ahead and you'll say grant create secret on schema. So you're granting create secret on schema. So I'll give the fully qualified name, that would be Snowflake Learning DB dot dev schema, and you have to provide it to the role. So the current role that I have is Snowflake Learning role, Snowflake Learning role. And this should allow me to create a secret. So this has to go above this, of course, because I'll go in sequence. So let's create this one. So now the statement is executed correctly, and I have a Snowflake running rule has the access to create a secret in this schema. So now let's go ahead and run this command because I need to create the secret, and now my OpenAI API key secret is generated. Before we go forward, I want to talk a little bit about Snowflake Container Services and how they are going to be, how our notebook is going to be executed and what the architecture looks like. So let's quickly have a look. Snowflake Container Services architecture. So maybe I should look for images and this one, yeah. So this is the image from, this is actually from their tutorial, which is really good tutorial. I think you should go through this if you feel like it. What has happened with notebooks is that it allows you to run Python, SQL, or Markdown code right within your Snowflake account or Snowflake context. So what happens is you upload an image with your, let's say, application code, which you now natively want to run on Snowflake. And that's really good because your data might already live on Snowflake. So you don't have to go too far to actually access your data and run your application on it, which is amazing. So when you have your application code, let's say in Python or R, or let's say you have an ML AI workload running in a Snowflake notebook, for example, you can basically connect to Snowflake native apps that they have, and you can actually run them on the CPU and GPU that are optimized to run on the Snowflake storage that contains your data. So that's actually a game changer. Now, while you have this in mind, I would like to say that you can actually create, now, while this is all running in a Snowflake container, and that's like any container for that matter, like a Docker container, you can actually connect it to an external source or external location using something called an external access integration. So if I show you, Snowflake external access integration. So an access integration is basically, let me see, external network access. Yeah. So this is basically an external access integration. I think you'll find a better documentation somewhere if I say Snowflake Notebooks, for example. There we go. When working with Node.js, you might need to, connect to external services. Like I said, you can have an OpenAI API key that you need to use to connect to OpenAI and get their latest model and be able to use that model within your application code. And for that reason, external access integrations are really important, especially when it comes to Snowflake notebooks, because they run on Docker containers. So you'll first need to create a network rule for that. And that's what we're going to create next. And then once we have the network rule, we'll create an external network access integration and we'll attach that to our Snowflake notebook. So let's go ahead and do that. To create Snowflake create network, I'll just see. Actually, we have it here. The OpenAI example is right here if you want to try it. You will create or replace a network API rule. So let's just copy this and run this right here. Now, this has a couple of things here. You are creating or replacing a network rule, and we're calling the rule OpenAI rule. This is our name for the rule. The mode is egress. Now, there are a couple of different modes. Basically, when you're going and running an application on a container runtime, you either want to reach out to an external service or you want to allow an external service to hit your endpoint. So for example, let's say you have an online application or web application deployed on a container. You want to allow a specific kind of traffic to come from outside and hit your API endpoint so they can actually access your application. That will be an ingress. Here, for example, we are trying to reach to OpenAI and get the latest model. So we are going from inside out. So that's why we call it egress. So that's the mode. The type would be the host port, where the host, it's a kind of port where you are going to hit the host at. And then, of course, you will need to mention all the kind of values in the list that you want to allow in that API. So this will be a REST API, basically, api.openai.com, that is allowing you that. If you have, let's say, a different kind of rule, then you will just keep on adding this as a list that you have different kind of, for example, in the case of Google Maps, you will have Google Maps dot com, and then you might have gmaps.com. So you can have different rules as part of the same, different values as part of the same rule. Now, before we create this, we'll need to create another grant, another access for this role to be able to create a network rule. So I'll just copy this. And now before continuing forward, I'll grant this role the network rule. So what I'll say is grant create network rule on schema Snowflake Learning DB this to rule this, right? So we are allowing the grant to create rule. So this is also executed, and now I'll go ahead and create a network rule. So now we have a secret, we have a network rule. The next thing in the list is to create an external access integration. So before we create that, I'll just copy this, and there we go. Now we have an external access integration, OpenAI integration, for example. In our case, it's OpenAI rule, and we have OpenAI API key, actually, our name is. So we'll change the authentication secrets. So what we are doing here, we are creating an external access integration. We are naming it as OpenAI integration. We are saying allowed network rules are OpenAI rules. So it's basically going to allow any traffic from inside that goes to api.openai.com. And then, of course, it's going to say allowed authentication secrets are OpenAI API key. This API key is going to be stored within that. And enabled equals to true. Now, before we do this, we have to run another command which actually allows the grant on this particular schema to, to create the network access rule to this role. The problem is, um, and if you are new to role-based access control, in Snowflake, everything is governed by the principle of release privilege. So the hierarchical access is controlled from your account admin to your database admin, for example, to your specific usage or role. In this case, I have Snowflake Learning role, and I don't want to allow that role in particular to have the access to create an integration, because then people will go ahead and keep on creating integrations, and I don't want everyone to have that access. So what I'll do is I will create an integration with a higher role, which manages all the integrations that are going on from my Snowflake account. And then I will allow usage on those integrations. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and I'll change to Snowflake account admin. And a word of caution here, if you are on your company's database or your company's Snowflake account, be very cautious on what you do with account admin if you have that access. Or you can just follow along with the Snowflake Learning role or similar role that you have less access on to create a network access, which I'm going to do next. So let's say I'm now on account admins, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create or replace external access integration, and I will run this. So I have the run create or replace external access integration now, and now I'm going to allow usage on that. So for allow usage, I think grant usage on external access integration would be the create external. Yeah, so I think there was a, so let's do this, and then I'll go back and I'll just say, hey, grant usage on the external access integration, and I'll name the OpenAI integration, and I'll just say Snowflake Learning role. This is my role, and I'm running this on integration statements. So the Google provided me a good summary, the Gemini, but it messed up this bit. So it's supposed to be just integration, not external access. So we rectified that here. Now, once you have the this running, now we already provide the usage on that integration to this role. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our role. Now we are in this role, and what we'll do is we'll try to use this. Now, the three things that we wanted to do were create database and schema, which we already did. We also granted the privileges on schema to create secret. We also provided the access to create a network rule. We also created an external access integration privilege. And now we want to create a privilege to create a notebook. So I'll rectify that, create a notebook. So what will that look like is on create notebook on schema, Snowflake Learning DB dev schema to role Snowflake Learning role. So we are basically saying grant create notebook on this. Now, why did I do that? Let's have a look. So if I go, now that we have all of these set up, the grants are done. Let's go ahead and try and create a notebook now, right? And then I'll show you why all these steps were necessary. So we go ahead and I'll open the notebooks over here. And as you can see right now, I don't have any notebooks. So let's go ahead and create a new notebook. And I'll name it as demo notebook. And here you can see I have a Snowflake learning database, which is my database right now. And I have a dev schema. The fact that I added this grant create notebook on schema is the reason why I'm able to see these notebook locations, because in Snowflake, everything that you create is a database object. A database object means it is within a database, within a schema, and within a particular hierarchy. So it goes from database, schema, and then your Snowflake object. So that's why it was very necessary that we have this access. And in this case, we are going to use a run-on container because that's what we're talking about. For all the ML AI workloads which require you to access, let's say, Python packages or install new packages, you will probably use run-on container. The rest of the things I'll leave as is because I want to use CPU. I don't want to spend too much money on GPUs. Going forward, of course, you can create with GPU as well, but I'm going to go with CPU and all the rest will remain as standard. Again, query warehouse, like I showed you before. In the context of Snowflake, you have one thing is called storage virtual warehouse. And in this case, I have already a virtual warehouse called Snowflake Learning Warehouse. If you want to learn more about it, let me know and I'll make another video. You can also use a compute warehouse, which comes directly as an extra small warehouse, and that's enough for our usage today. So I'll go ahead and create this notebook. And now we are in this notebook. And I'll start it. And also I'll delete some of the things that I don't need. I also don't need this, so I'll delete that. I also don't need this. Yeah. And now let's run this. And one of the nice features that they've come up with is that you can name yourselves, which is really good for organizing your, I guess, scripts or notebooks. So let's say Python create session. So this is my first cell. And I'll run this and this will get me the session. Now, as we are here, we probably want to know how to get that secret from that external access integration and how to add that access integration into this notebook. So currently, if I go to the notebook settings and I have something called an external access, and you will see that there is an OpenAI integration. Why is this showing here is because I had allowed that access integration usage to this Snowflake learning rule that I'm currently using to create the notebook, which is why I'm able to see this external access integration here. So you can actually turn it on here. Now, let's go ahead and turn it on and we save this. And now I have access to that external access integration. And now we have a restarting of our kernel. And next is the bit where we go about understanding how to access this secret. So far what we have done, we have created a database and schema. We have granted privileges on the schema to create secret, to create a network rule, and to create an external access integration, and create a notebook. Then we went ahead and created a secret. We created a network rule, and we created an external access integration. Now it's time to create access a secret within a notebook. And how do we go about doing that? Now, there is something of a thing where you go about accessing secrets within notebook Snowflake. So how to use secrets inside a Snowflake notebook is actually an open question and they haven't answered that much. So what you go about doing is you basically set up an external access integration for Snowflake notebooks. And once you have that, you have actually a secret key within that, right? And you basically add that secret within your access integration. And that's the only way you can actually use something with a notebook because you're basically attaching your network access to your Docker container, basically. And once you have altered the notebook, and this is what we did in the last bit where we manually went ahead and enabled the access integration, you can actually use a command for that as well. Once you have that, you have to kind of create a function to access that. Now, let's go ahead and find, basically we'll go ahead and we'll say accessing Snowflake secrets. And so what we'll do is um, we will go ahead and find this API reference for access to secrets. There we go. And so we'll use something called an API reference. And what it does is basically to retrieve credentials contained in a secret. And a secret is basically the normal way how you store API keys or other integration secrets that you need in Snowflake. And so when you have created something using create secret command, you can actually leverage API reference to access those secrets. And you have multiple languages support here. So you have Java or Python to retrieve the credentials. And you can have different kinds of methods. For example, a generic string, OAuth token, or secret type as well. So let's have a look at the Python specific APIs. So I'll click here and I have a function here. So let's copy this function. Actually, not this one. Let's copy this simple function here and try to create a function that passes or returns our API key when we call that function. So I'll go back to my worksheet here. I'll copy paste this function. So what this function is doing, right? So in this case, it's basically creating a function that returns back the secret type. In this case, for example, it's an OAuth token. So it will return the type as OAuth. But we don't require this particular function. We don't need the type. We actually need the value. So let's go back and have a look at the API reference. This is a get secret handler. So in this case, whenever we create a Python secret, we have a particular kind of handler that we can use to access the or extract the value out of it. So for us, we have multiple different kinds of APIs within the Snowflake module. We have get auth access token because you can store OAuth 2 tokens as well that are required to access some of the services outside. We have a get secret type, which we copied just now. We also have a generic or a standard username password secret as well that we can use. And we also have a Google cloud provider token as well. If you have, your access key ID, your secret access key and token to access or integrate with a cloud provider. We will use the get generic secret string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this handler get generic secret string, and I'm also going to replace this method name with that, and I'm going to replace this thing as well. And I'm going to say get OpenAI key. This will be my function, and I'll also move to 3.10 because, well, it's 3.11 is the latest, so at least we should go to 3.10, and this allows for Python versions 3.9 and above. So I think 3.10 is good. And in this function, we also need to provide something called the external access integration. And we already have that access integration, so we'll say OpenAI integration. And in this case, we have to provide the secret name that we want to access as well. So our secret name was OpenAI API key. So what we'll do is we'll create that and put that over here. This is our OpenAI API key. And then we will need to create get generic string. We already have the cred here that we're calling it. And we'll just call it secret value is a variable, and I'll just say secret value, return that secret value. And we have the handler. I believe you can change this name to some generic name as well, or just change a secret. I just wanted to create something that I knew. You can even say get secret value. I believe that should work. Get secret value. Let's try it. If it didn't work, I'll change it back to the other one. So this is our function. Now, before we create the function, we need to grant privileges to this role to create a function as well. Snowflake grant create function. So user-defined functions. I really like Google how it's giving me this, so I'll just copy this and I'll just paste it right over here. So grant create function on schema. So you have to go ahead and provide your database, Snowflake Learning DB dot Snowflake dev schema to your role, that is Snowflake learning role. So let's create that. Now we have the create function access. So let's go ahead and create this function. Handler could not find header in function. So I guess we do have to get generic secret string. Handler is not there. Okay, let's get back. So I guess you have to create the handler. Basically, you are telling you will create a get generic secret string handler, and you have to define that handler name here. And then you use that same within that. So now that you have this function created, you basically have provided this function the access integration and a handler that will take care of extracting the secret value, the string, as part of this. And as you may know, we created actually a generic string before as a type of that OpenAI KPK. So the only thing left for us to do is to go ahead and access that. So I'll just rename the cell py access secret. And what we'll do is we'll just say, when you want to run SQL queries in Python, as you can see, this cell allows for you to run Python or SQL or Markdown code. I am just biased towards using Python right now because I want to show the full power of Snowflake Notebooks. So that's why I'm using Python. So let's go ahead and create a SQL query that runs within the Python. So for that, what we need to do is we have the session variable. So this is the current Snowpark session that we have created early on. And then what we do is session.sql will allow you to basically returns a new data frame representing the results of a SQL query. So if you pass a SQL query, it will return back the values of that SQL query. In this case, what we'll do is SQL, and then I'll just say F. Actually, I don't need an F string, so I'll just keep it simple. I'll just say select, and then I'll have to pass in the name of the function. So my get OpenAI key, and select OpenAI key, and then the function call. And if all goes well, I think this should return us something. So this is saying name session is not defined. Interesting. So I'll run this to get the session. And there we go. I have my secret OpenAI API key. Hooray! Next we have to do is basically extract that value. So AI key. And then you have your OpenAI key in there. So you just say OpenAI key. And this is actually a data frame if I'm not wrong. So now if you check the type of this OpenAI API key, you will see that this is a Snowpark data frame. And how to access the value of a Snowpark data frame is what we have to see. Accessing values in Snowpark data frame. And what you have to do is you do .collect. And so I'll do that. If I can go to the demo notebook, .collect. And this should run successfully as well. And now if I say OpenAI key dot and then you can have row 0. So if that's the case, I think that should give us the value of something. So that's there, and then I say this, and then I have my secret OpenAI key. That's correct. So there we go. We have our secret OpenAI API key. And just to recap what we did, we had a database and schema. If you didn't, you created a database and schema. Then we granted privileges on that schema. Granted privileges to create secret, create a network rule, and create an external access integration, and a create notebook on that schema. We created the secret, a network rule, and external access integration. And then we used the network rule and secret within that access integration. And then finally, we created a notebook, attached our access integration to that notebook. We did that manually, but you can use a query as well. And then we basically created a function from the Python API reference to fetch a generic secret string within our notebook using that external access integration that we had created before. And that's how you can go ahead and start accessing private access tokens or API keys within your notebooks. And yeah, the sky is the limit. Now you have an OpenAI access, and if you have an OpenAI key, you can actually connect that OpenAI key and access integration like we did today, and then start using Snowflake for ML AI workloads. Happy coding.